Someone recently left a comment under one of my videos and said plants are not food. This, speaking of the carnivore diet, is the easiest way to correct blood sugar levels. Is this true? I'll put in my 2 cents in the video that follows. Today we will consider the carnivore diet. Before we get too far into this, let me respond to the comment that I referred to in the intro and the idea that plants are not food. This carnivore diet is the easiest way to correct blood sugar levels. The first point is patently false, in my opinion. People have been eating plants for all of recorded history. The Bible tells us that just after creation, God told Adam, "I now give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the entire earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. I give every green plant for food." So clearly, God says that plants are food, and if I have to choose who to believe, my Creator or a YouTube comment, well, I will choose God. Now, the vegans may be feeling pretty good about now, but by Genesis 9, God expands the human diet, saying, "Everything that creeps on the ground and all the fish of the sea are under your authority. You may eat any moving thing that lives. As I gave you the green plants, I now give you everything." So meat is now on the menu. And since those days, human beings have been meat eaters, with the exception of certain groups. So, in my mind, that takes care of the legitimacy of both plants and animal products as food for us. But for the diabetic, the question of what foods to eat is not merely a question of legitimacy. It is a question of efficacy. Which foods reduce high glucose levels and which foods increase it? Just because I can eat a food does not mean I should eat it. If I'm allergic to lentils, then regardless of how great a food lentils may be for the general population, they're not good for me. My special intolerance of lentils makes them off limits for me, even though they may be a perfectly legitimate food otherwise. Well, let's talk about the carnivore diet. First, not all carnivore diets look alike. Some eat only meat and drink only water. Others eat meat plus eggs plus high-fat dairy, and they allow themselves coffee and tea. Right now, the carnivore diet is in the eyes of the beholder as to what you will allow yourself. But everyone agrees there must be no fruit, no vegetables, grains, or beans. The carnivore diet is sort of an extension and expansion of the keto diet. The idea behind it is this: if low carb is good and it helps me lose weight and keep glucose under control, then no carb should be greater still. If 30 grams of carbs a day is productive and beneficial, then 0 carbs per day must be wonderful. Maybe fruits and veggies aren't the miracle foods we thought they were. Maybe the true miracle foods are steak and hamburger patties with an occasional egg or two thrown in. Now, this carnivore diet would probably be limited to an extremely fringe part of society, except for one thing. It does often produce some pretty spectacular results in certain people. Here's an example from a man who's followed beet diabetes practically from the beginning. He was on a keto diet for years, and he saw good results, but his glucose levels never quite dropped as low as he wanted them to be. And he often experienced significant dawn effect morning glucose numbers, even after being involved in keto for years. He recently shared this comment: "I got my first labs on carnivore. A1C with keto was 5.8, with carnivore 5.1 after 2 months. Fasting glucose, with keto it was 102, now on carnivore it is 84. Triglyceride under keto was 140, under carnivore it's 74. Uric acid under keto 8.2, which is not good, Under carnivore, it's 5.1, which is good. I guess he says I do best eating the simplest possible diet with less fat and much less dairy. Of course, he's only been on the carnivore diet for a couple of months, so this isn't exactly proof other than the fact that in the short range, he's done very well and seen excellent results. On the other hand, I have heard from people who went carnivore, saw a dramatic improvement in their glucose levels, and then at a certain point, while they were still eating carnivore, inexplicably saw their glucose levels rise significantly. And the reality is this: there simply aren't that many good studies, and there are no long-range studies on carnivore that prove anything, one way or the other. There's plenty of evidence that carnivore can lower glucose, lower blood pressure, and lower triglycerides over the short haul. There's virtually no evidence of what effect it has over 10 or 20 years, good or bad. So what are my thoughts about the carnivore diet? First, personally, I just don't have any desire to eat this way because I'm doing so well on, not even a keto diet really, just a low-carb diet. With my A1C hovering around 5.0 and my morning fasting glucose often in the 80s, it seems unnecessary for me to make any more sacrifices than what I'm already making. As to why I don't push carnivore for others, one reason has to do with sustainability. Now, every diet that you eat is going to involve sacrificing certain foods and meals that you love. With a keto or low-carb diet, you can find some pretty tasty substitutes, and you can usually still enjoy your meals without the feeling like you're eating prison fare or worse. But there are two extremely restrictive diets on the opposite ends of the spectrum. The vegan diet, which says don't eat anything but plant foods, and the carnivore diet, which says never let plant food touch your lips, essentially eat nothing but meat. And if you decide on either one of these diets, vegan or carnivore, you're committing yourself to a severe diet that most people could never stay with over the course of 10 or 20 years. This is why most vegans are idealistic young people, often with very little patience for people like me who don't see the things that the way they see them. Few of them, in my mind, will still be vegan, or at least eat the way they do now when they get into their 60s. And the carnivore diet is not so different. It would be easy to implement it for a while, but to do this for years and decades would probably prove difficult, if not impossible, for many. Some probably will be able to do it, but most probably will not. But I also believe that foods derived from plants have nutrition in them that you cannot get from meat. If God gave humans plants at the beginning of creation, who are we to suggest that plants have absolutely no value to them? It has been believed for thousands of years that plants are good for you, and it's only in the last few years that people have dared to suggest that, as was said in that comment I read at the beginning, plants are not food. I personally believe that both diets, the vegan and the carnivore, are unnatural. The reason I believe this is that few groups of people in our world, except for religious reasons, eat like this. Throughout the history of our earth, people have generally eaten animal products when they were available and they could afford them, and plant foods when they were available. And they've eaten both animal products and plant foods when both were available. You may protest, yeah, but what about the people from the frozen north? They live and thrive on seal meat. But even in such places, when their limited summer appears and berries and greens show up, these people usually eat them. Their lack of plants in their diet is not because they hate plants or have some special reason not to eat them. It's because they have no choice living where they live. And if I lived there and there were no stores around, I'd gladly have my breakfast, lunch, and dinner of seal meat with an occasional polar bear pie. And I need to say this: just because slashing carbs lowers glucose, and we know that it does, that does not imply that cutting carbs out of our diet entirely is superior to simply lowering them to a reasonable level. God created you with a pancreas that is more than capable of processing carbs, and for century after century, people have eaten beans and potatoes and rice and deer meat and cow meat and berries and greens without getting diabetes. Diabetes used to be incredibly rare in our world, even though our world as a whole ate carbs. But they did not drink soda. They didn't eat candy or munch on pretzels and chips. They didn't eat breakfast cereal or snack on Little Debbie's snack cakes or moon pies. And for uncounted generations, men and women were born, lived out their lives, and died without ever becoming diabetics, except in rare cases. Today, we're living in a diabetes epidemic because we simply eat too much, and we overdose on all kinds of junk carbs, and we graze and snack from the time we wake up to the time we go to bed. And for the vast majority, we do not need to do the carnivore diet to overcome diabetes. But we absolutely must seriously limit our carbs, stop snacking altogether, and narrow our window of eating to 8 hours a day, or preferably 6 hours. Now, nature has a couple of laws or rules that are relevant to how we use our body. Law number 1, if we neglect to use our body, we will lose what we have. In other words, use it or lose it. This is why we exercise. This is why we go for walks or take jogs or use a treadmill or elliptical trainer or lift weights. We put our body in motion. We use it so we can stay strong and not atrophy. Law number 2, if we abuse our body, it will fail us. This is why we must take good care of our bodies and not overwork them. Going for a 30-minute light jog on a spring day is fine. Running full tilt through a snowstorm in sub-zero temperatures for 12 hours could kill you. With our pancreas, these principles are important to keep in mind. When we ate the standard diet with lots of sugar, lots of junk carbs, lots of white flour, and lots of sugary drinks, we were abusing our bodies, and they simply could not stand this kind of abuse, and our metabolic system began to shut down. It started with slight insulin resistance, and after some years it progressed to full-scale diabetes. Our pancreas could not keep up with all the carbs and sugars we were throwing at it, and eventually it became weaker and less efficient. On the other hand, if we give our pancreas nothing to do by refusing to ever eat a single carb, we're going in the opposite direction. Imagine if I tied my right arm to my body and did not use it for an entire year. In my ignorance, I might suppose I was doing myself a favor. I was giving my arm a rest. My right arm would get a 1-year vacation. For a whole year, it will have no work at all to do. But after a year, I take a look at my arm, and it has grown skinny and weak, and it looks terrible. Turns out my arm did not need that much rest. Not using my arm created a flabby, skinny, weak arm. I would have been better off using that arm as it was intended to be used. Now, you've been given a pancreas that should be able to last you for 100 years or more, provided that you do not abuse it. And you do not have to be afraid to give it a little work to do, such as eating a salad or having some chia seed pudding or eating some almond bread or a handful of nuts. Plant foods are not the devil. They're not evil. But over-consuming carbs can spell serious trouble for you, and sadly, that is precisely what our world is doing. It's a carb here and a sugar there, here a carb, there a sugar, everywhere a carb, a sugar. With that being said, I do think that a carnivore diet can be useful either as a temporary intervention when nothing else works, or as a permanent lifestyle when it is the only kind of diet that will get your glucose levels close to a normal range. The man I mentioned earlier had been struggling for years, faithfully eating a keto diet and still not seeing the results he wanted. He saw improvement, but not what he was wanting to see. And if I'm reading him right, it seems like he went into the carnivore diet in a grudging, last-ditch sort of way. But once he saw the results, he became excited, and he's now motivated to continue with his diet. And I don't blame him a bit, as I frequently say, to get your glucose levels in line, you do what you have to do. In our Beat Diabetes challenges that we've had this year, I have recommended people make Mondays a carnivore day. Take one day out of your week and eat 0 carbs. Call this a Sabbath rest for your pancreas. But then on the other days, eat a few carbs here and there. Have a salad, have an avocado, eat a green pepper with some cream cheese inside. My feeling is this: if you haven't given keto or low carb a chance, do that first. You will find it far more sustainable than a strict diet of meat for every meal and every day. But if you have done the keto or the low-carb diet for a couple of years and you're still not where you want to be, well, you might want to consider the carnivore diet at least for several months and see where you end up. Or you might want to cycle from keto to carnivore every month or two. There's still a lot we don't know, and I don't think the verdict is in on the carnivore diet. There are quite a few of us who have done low carb for 20-plus years. But I don't know of anyone who's eaten carnivore for 20 years. It's the new kid on the block, and a lot of us are just a little bit leery of it. But I will say testimonies abound about its positive effects short term, and it may prove to be something that is here to stay. Ultimately, you must be responsible for your dietary choices. No doctor, no nutritionist, and no YouTube guy is going to have to live with the consequences of your eating habits. Learn as much as you can, pray for wisdom, and make your choice. I want to remind you about my other YouTube channel, which goes simply by my name, Dennis Pollock. On this channel, I am uploading 1 video per week, and I call these videos Video Devos, or Video Devotionals. In these brief 6 or 7 minute talks, I discuss key Bible topics on all kinds of subjects, such as who will go to heaven, what about those who never hear the gospel, God's definition of a virtuous woman, predestination, was Jesus a conservative, will God give me whatever I ask, the nature of hell, is it safe to go with your gut, did Jesus and Paul preach 2 different gospels, and a whole lot more. So check out my Video Devo channel, which goes by my name, Dennis Pollock. You may just find that the 7 minutes per week you spend watching these devotionals will turn out to be a solid investment of your time. And as a bonus, you'll see Benedicta there from time to time. A link to these videos is in the description.